Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin going into FOMC. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So we are approaching the ever-expected FOMC. You'll note that it is coming up on March 19th. So we are about to get the decision. Most likely outcome is that they're going to hold rates steady. I don't really think that's what the market is overly concerned about right now. It's more so whether the balance sheet runoff will end or not. We've obviously made a lot of, comparisons to what happened in prior cycles as long as the balance sheet runoff continued. And one of those having been, if you look at say the advanced decline index of the top 100 cryptocurrencies, it gives you an idea of why this cycle feels different than last cycle, right? The ADI has been dropping for basically three and a half years. Whereas when a lot of people watching this video right now joined in 2020, 2021, the ADI was going up, suggesting more assets were going up than declining. Now, since 2021, collectively, we've seen more assets go down than go up in the top 100. It's just that because Bitcoin went up, total market cap did. But a lot of alts have bled. And so we can make the comparison to say, well, you know what? We noted that last cycle, the ADI didn't really go up until after quantitative tightening was over. And even then, the ADI still went down for a few months, but it didn't start going back up again in any durable fashion until sometime after quantitative tightening ended. Last cycle, it happened to be about, 3 to 4 months after quantitative tightening ended before the ADI started actually going up in any sustained way. So it makes sense to talk about the balance sheet runoff. Now, in this case, there's a lot of speculation as to whether the Fed will end quantitative tightening or not. And, the Bank of Canada obviously already announced the end of quantitative tightening, a little while ago. I think they were planning on ending it in March. The Fed has been somewhat delayed or lagging what the Bank of Canada does, suggesting there's some resilience with the U.S. economy compared to, say, that of Canada. But one of the things I go back to is, well, what did the Fed actually say? And has anything actually changed since then? And, if you look at the minutes from January 28th, 29th, so the last FOMC, one of the things that it says in there is that it says, in their expectations of Federal Reserve balance sheet policy, survey respondents on average saw the process of runoff concluding by mid-2025, slightly later than they had previously expected. That's interesting to me because remember, January 28th, I mean, if you look at the stock market, they're not really watching Bitcoin, but if you look at the stock market, January 28th, the market was way up here, near all-time highs. Since then, the market has dropped 10%. Now, the market also dropped 10% back over here in late 2023, and it ultimately did not sway the Fed from continuing quantitative tightening. I mean, they just simply continued QT, even though the market dropped 10%. So it's true that the Fed said that they will wait until mid-2025, and it's possible that they do. I mean, if you look at the next meetings, there's a meeting in May, June, July. Even if they don't end quantitative tightening on the 19th, it doesn't mean they won't sometime in May, June, or July. In fact, I would say the most likely outcome is that quantitative tightening does end by the July meeting at the latest if you want to take the Fed at their word. I mean, if you wait until September, that seems, beyond mid-year. And they've already suggested that mid-year was already later than they previously thought. So they said by mid-2025. If you read through the FOMC minutes, don't worry, I read through a lot of it so that you don't have to. There definitely are participants that it seems like think that runoff should at least slow down before mid-2025, if not stop before then. Remember, mid-2025 is the average view. So there's going to be some views that think QT should stop probably on the 19th of March, and then others that think it should continue going on potentially much later in the year. So mid-2025 is the average view. Now, the other thing that has happened since January 28th is we've obviously gotten a lot of new policies by the new administration, which has absolutely introduced a lot of uncertainty. Tariffs are certainly the talk of the town these days. And it's hard to know exactly what effect those are going to have. There's obviously a lot of people discussing whether they're inflationary or deflationary. I think the obvious thing is to say that a tariff would be inflationary because it would pass off rising costs to the consumer. But the counterpoint is if the consumer is tapped out and then they see even higher prices, then they're just going to stop buying those things, which could lead to it being deflationary. So I think a lot of the arguments are somewhat subtle. It could be either inflationary or deflationary, depending on if the consumer is tapped out. Meaning, are we heading into a recession or not? If we're not, then the consumer is not yet tapped out. If we are, then obviously the tariffs could actually be deflationary. If it turns out, the consumer is just going to fight back and say, you know what, we're not going to accept higher prices forever. Something's got to change, and that's ultimately what affects the bottom line of these businesses. So in this case, the Fed said mid-2025. There have been some changes since then. We've got a lot of new policies. We've got a 10% correction in the stock market. There's a chance that they do what the Bank of Canada did, where they say that QT is going to end, but it doesn't end right now. Like it could be that they say it's going to end in May, or it's going to end in June, or they're gonna slow it down. In fact, if you look previously, they already did slow it down, right? I mean, if you look pretty closely here at the rate of change of quantitative tightening, just through here, right, you'll notice that it kind of already has started to slow down a little bit, right? It's not decreasing at the same rate that it once was, and this happened, several months ago. I think the biggest issue for the Fed right now is, and there's also the debt ceiling, potential issue. But I think the biggest issue for the Fed right now that they're having to weigh, as far as the macro is concerned, is inflation. And inflation, it did go down last month, which is a good thing, which might help them move the date of ending QT to be a little bit sooner, if that inflation data point is actually accurate. But one data point does not make a trend. There's times in the past where inflation dropped for a month and then it continued to go up. So I don't really know if the Fed has enough data yet to definitively say that they've done enough. If you go back to the 1970s and you look at this, say, the second wave of inflation, that data point was the March data point, the March of 1973 data point, where there was a huge jump in inflation. Now, I'm not necessarily expecting that, but we don't have the March data point yet, right? We have the February data point, because remember, it's 1 month delayed. So I just wonder if with inflation expectations going through the roof recently, the highest it's been in a long time, you have to wonder if Powell's going to take a cautious stance here and not overly commit. So I'm really curious what he has to say. If quantitative tightening ends immediately, then there's a good chance you would see ETH Bitcoin get a bounce. Last cycle, when quantitative tightening ended, you can see here that ETH Bitcoin got a nice bounce, right? There was a bounce right here. Quantitative tightening ended, and then ETH Bitcoin got a bounce back up to the bull market support band, right? So right now, that would correspond to just over 0.03, which is crazy. I mean, now we're talking about a bounce by ETH Bitcoin to 0.03, that's what it would essentially correspond to if that in fact happens. So keep an eye out for that if quantitative tightening actually does end. The other thing, if you go look at the minutes, there are, as I said before, there are certainly a lot of people in there. I mean, you can just actually search through balance sheet, and if you go look at, that's obviously, sort of the main headline, but you can see that they have cautioned against other things like the debt limit situation. They have talked about, I believe one of the places we're talking about ending it sooner. We'll see. We'll see what they have to say tomorrow. But I know that a lot of people are curious about what's going to actually happen. And I just want to remind people one more thing that, one of the things I said a long time ago, and I kind of still stand by it, was that I expected weakness in the markets between February OPEX and March OPEX, right? February options expiration and March options expiration. And now March options expiration is coming up within the next week or so, right? It's possible that weakness in the markets could persist beyond that. Certainly possible. But there would be more favorable seasonality starting around mid-April or so, I believe, about mid-April. And it could even be before then, right? It could even be the end of March. And we've talked about that before. If you look at like year-to-date ROI of Bitcoin, the S&P 500, in sort of between February and March, that can be a weak time. In fact, the entire pandemic crash was between February OPEX and March OPEX, basically. So, when it is a risk-off time during that period, you can see pretty significant drops in a relatively short period of time. Because while this is a similar correction by the S&P that it had in late 2023, it's occurred about 3 times faster. So that's why it feels different, is because the market has been dropping a lot worse. And, some people are blaming tariffs. And I don't really know if it's tariffs. I don't think tariffs are helping. And also, there's all this tariff stuff going into effect, I think, April 2nd. So that's one of the things that I'm not super confident in, that, you get that low in mid-March. Obviously, there's plenty of examples by the S&P where it finds a low in mid-March. So mid-March was kind of like the earliest that you could find a local low around here, right? That's the earliest. I would say the latest would be around mid-April. Right? So sometime between mid-March to mid-April is where I would generally expect some form of a low to form, from which point the market gets, say, like a rally back up to the bull market square peg. It's impossible to time the exact low, but that's what I would guess would be the outcomes. A low sometime between mid-March and mid-April. We've obviously reached that mid-March milestone. It could persist through mid-April depending on, sort of how the macro evolves, right? What does the Fed say tomorrow? Do they throw the markets a bone? And in QT, do they come out more dovish and say more rate cuts are coming? Or does Powell just shut it all down and go on with the same rhetoric that we have ample reserves? That's the thing that really sticks with me that he said in the last meeting. I think a lot of people were hoping that QT would end in January, and he just came out and said there's ample reserves. There's no reason to end it. How does that change much between January and March? Obviously, the debt ceiling could have an effect on what they want to do, but those are my thoughts going into FOMC. ETH Bitcoin to me seems like it's struggled enough for a while. Alt Bitcoin pairs, though, they also saw relative strength in March of last year as well, right here, before dropping in April and again in June. And we know that these two drops by alt Bitcoin pairs last year occurred after the Bank of Japan raised rates. And the Bank of Japan is likely going to raise rates again this year. Right now, the projection is not until Q3. But if there's another, increase in the rates in Japan sometime this year, I have to believe it's going to lead to another rinse of alt Bitcoin pairs. And it's why I continue to think that alt Bitcoin pairs will continue to go to the range lows. Now, if QT ends tomorrow, we'll talk about how that might change things. But for now, that's still the base case that I'm sort of operating under. So again, we'll talk more about it tomorrow. A lot of times I don't even like putting out videos like this before some type of a major monetary policy decision, because I just, it's easy to talk in circles. Like, if this, then that, if this, then that. I could just wait until tomorrow and see what happened and then post the video. But I just want to provide some thoughts going into the meeting, and let's see what happens. And after it happens, we'll talk about it, and we'll talk about what it means for the markets. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. We also do have the annual ITC Bracket Challenge. Winner will get a 1-year free subscription to Into the Cryptoverse Premium. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.